Okay, sorry about that. Bring the January meeting of the Long Island Railroad Committee to order. Are there any public comments?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. We have two public speakers registered this morning, Omar Vera, followed by Murray Bowden. We would ask our speakers to adhere to the 2-minute time limit and to speak to matters on the committee agenda.
All right.
Now we're good.
Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, MTA Long Island Railroad Committee. Welcome to, and Happy New Year. Welcome to January edition of your meeting. And I mostly don't really have much to say, except I just reiterate what I said previously in previous meetings. Although there is one thing I'm a little concerned about, though, and that is the implementation of Freedom Ticket. Is there a timetable for when that will be implemented? Because the people of Eastern Queens, Long Island, really need it. But other than that, though, I don't really have that much to say. Most of it's old business, as Andrew would say. But with that said, I yield the balance of my time and see you around.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Murray Bowden.
Today's presentations revolve around positive train control and to bring the understanding that it's a technology that was invented 10 years ago and has been supplanted by autonomous control of one sort or another. How it relates to Long Island Railroad goes to the crossing at East Hampton, where there are traffic lights and flashing red lights. Flashing red lights are for heavy rail. Traffic lights are for light rail. In every major city, Boston, New York, where you have traffic lights and light rail, it works. Where there's so-called heavy rail, there are flashing red lights. Both are railroad cars. The only difference is the weight of the railroad cars. So Long Island Railroad is depending on the weight of the railroad cars to tell you the lights. In Florida, at all of the crossings of the canals, there are gates with traffic lights. On a Willis Avenue bridge, there is a gate with traffic lights. Drivers today are distracted. They need one consistent idea. Everyone knows a traffic light means stop, and when you put a red light camera up there, they stop. It is legal to go around the gate where there are flashing red lights. Look in the manuals. It's legal. Do you want them to stop? Then put up traffic lights. But the inability of Long Island Railroad to recognize that the world has changed and that they should do whatever it needs to be done to uniformly have traffic lights with cameras at railroad crossings would reduce the accident rate significantly. That's important because if they cannot recognize the meaning of using standard traffic lights, they cannot recognize the failure of using positive train control. Positive train control was based on the IBM computer mainframe, which doesn't exist anymore. My car stops by itself. Buses run by themselves on campuses with nobody in them, successfully. Volvo ordered 23,000, Uber ordered 23,000 Volvo cars to run by themselves without drivers. Do you mean trains can't run by themselves and stop when something is in the way? It's something to think about, and the process of evaluating why we cannot go from positive train control, which doesn't control a lot, to autonomous control, which controls everything, you need to look at. My presentations today will continue to build on this subject.
Thank you very much. That completes our public comment period. I have the minutes from the December 11th meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes? If not, I'll make a motion to approve. Second, all in favor? Okay. We'll go to President's report. Pat?
Yes, good morning. I'd like to talk about a couple things, and I'm going to follow on talking about what you heard at the Metro North Committee meeting, and that was the challenges we faced in December and early January and the impacts that it had on our service. And I'm going to start with December 5th when we had slippery rail conditions that were quite severe because of the environmental conditions, which largely was a very misty day. Slippery rail, as you all know, is caused when leaves get crushed by the train wheels. It leaves a residue on the head of the rail. We deal with that, and I'll explain how in a few minutes. Throughout the fall season, obviously leaves start falling in October. But on December 5th, we had something that really aggravates it, and that is like a heavy mist to do type thing. Long Island Railroad normally runs about 740 trains a day. We, on December 5th, had 245 of them that were late due to slippery rail. Now, when we encounter slippery rail, we very much encourage our operators to operate more carefully. That is, approach stations in anticipation of sliding through the stations, to therefore approach it more slowly to try and anticipate the slippery rail conditions and control their stop. And they obviously, when they're successful at doing that, will, in the course of their run, accumulate additional running time, which causes the majority of the delays. But December 5th was an unusual day in that we had a tremendous impact on our fleet because of that day. It wasn't just the day in dealing with the slippery rail conditions and 245 late trains. It was something that transpired and impacted us for over the next several weeks. That week alone, we lost 210 cars taken out of service because of flat spots on the wheel. Those flat spots are caused when they go into braking and they slide on the head of the rail. The following week, we had another 157 trains taken out of service because of flat wheels. And it's not because we had the same conditions over and over again. It's just because we didn't capture all the problem ones in that first week. Trains get turned in because the wheels are thumping and get taken out of service. So that obviously puts a huge strain on our daily fleet requirement and being able to what we call meet the line. So we suffered a tremendous number of train cancellations over a several week period. We operated with a number of trains, a majority of trains, short cars, which caused severe crowding on the trains that were able to run. To put it in context, I went back and looked at when we get a flat spot on the wheel, what we have to do to fix it is run it through what's called a wheel lathe, a wheel trilling machine, and where we actually cut steel off the wheel so that it's round again. It no longer has a flat spot. Primarily, we true wheels at Hillside, which is primarily the electric fleet, and at Morris Park, which is primarily the diesel. When we have problems, we do put some of the electric fleet into Morris Park. Normally, we have a third location at West Side Yard. West Side Yard has been out of service for several years now, so Amtrak could build the casement for connecting to the tunnel project under the Hudson. So that has been unavailable for 7 years. So I went back or several years, not 7 years. I went back and looked at how many wheel trues we've done in the past 3 years, and amazingly, all 3 years were about 1,450 wheel truings done over the course of a year. For 2017, we did 1,000 more wheel truings than we did in prior years. And my point of bringing it up is that to have you understand, this was not normal. This was way above normal. We do a lot of things to fight slippery rail. Obviously, we always need to be prepared for the worst conditions. It's not just to complain about the conditions that are out there. It's to do something about it. That's our charge. One of the things that we did when this hit is we had a new shop built at Arch Street as part of the East Side Access Project that had never been connected and had a wheel truing machine. Well, in very short order, we built a track connecting to that shop, and we were cutting cars in that shop very quickly to bring us back quicker and online. We certainly will have that option as we go forward, because next slippery rail season is upon us, and it is hoped that we get West Side Yard back. There are some issues with the construction that's been going on over there. I'm not positive they're going to make it, but I'm pushing real hard to have them make it. Should mention some of the normal stuff we do. We run trains every night trying to clean that leaf residue off the railhead. It's a combination of trains that are pulled by diesels around the system that use high-pressure washers to try and remove the residue from the head of the rail. We also apply, I like to call it toothpaste, but it's a compound called sandite, and you put it on the head of the rail, and it's supposed to improve the adhesion between the wheel and the rail so you don't have that slippery rail condition. So they're the types of things we normally do. We did just modify our fleet this year, and we're going to continue to do that next year and put more leaf fighting equipment out there every night to try and reduce the impact that slippery rail has on our system. As I said, we're never going to control the weather, and we need to do everything we can to harden our service so that we're impacted the least when these events do occur. Let me talk about the period of December 26th to January 8th, when we had extremely cold temperatures throughout the system. And they impact us in several different ways when you get an extended period of time with cold temperatures. The first one that people probably hear about the most and talk about is broken rails. And yes, we get broken rails, we get joints that pull apart, and that type of stuff. We also have, because there's so much stress in the rail, quite often we will have switches, which is where you have switch points that have to move. The rail is under tremendous pressure, and the alignment of the switch point and the running rail is very important. And when they get out of sync, we get in a condition where we get a switch failure. You know, typically everybody just hears it as a signal problem, but the switch is out of alignment. We need somebody to go there and adjust that switch. So the way we fight that is we position people at key interlockings, so we're able to respond as quickly as possible when that happens. But it is a challenge, and we need to be on top of it. We need to have our people there to be able to do something about it. The other thing is the equipment. Extreme cold is very difficult for the equipment. The equipment is faced with a lot of pneumatic systems and stuff like that that are subject to problems when you get extreme cold. Again, we need to get that equipment taken care of. We, over the years, have been trying to do things to harden that, new products, new ways of protecting different pieces of the machinery that's involved. So there are some of the problems that occur. It's obviously worse when a broken rail occurs in the worst possible location in the middle of rush hour. That causes us consternation. Again, that's about positioning people in the right spots. We do a lot to try and stop broken rails. We have increased our rail, it's called the Sperry system. It's a rail flaw detection system where we do an internal view of the rail and try to look for defects in the steel that could lead to a break when you get in these high stress conditions. So we've increased the frequency of doing those inspections. We have also undertaken a rail grinding program. Rail grinding programs will remove flaws that are in the head of the rail, will make a ride a smoother ride, will cause less impacts into a rail, so we do not get a fatigue break when rails are subject to an impact from a wheel riding over it. We've increased the amount of rail grinding. In fact, 3 years ago, we weren't doing any rail grinding. So we have been very aggressive about that and doing that on the system. Let me move to the snowstorm, or the bomb cyclone, as was referred to in the earlier meeting. And if I could have a couple pictures put up there. The snowstorm was extremely difficult for us. It was, depending where you were, a 10 to 16-inch snowstorm. These are pictures out east where we had drifts that were 6 feet or more tall. We have the other picture. It doesn't show it there, but we had one there with a guy standing in front of that snow that we were trying to plow, and it was over his head. One of the pieces of equipment we used to try and clear it is what's called a Jordan spreader. It is on today's agenda as a ratification. If you look at it, it looks a little discolored there. That piece of equipment we only use in non-third rail territory. Believe it or not, we had a car that went flying through the air, went over the blades of that, and hit the brown above the yellow there is where the car hit the cab of that when it flew through the air. Knocking our Jordan spreader out, of course, just before the Christmas season, or just before the winter season, I should say, and the impact it has on our operations. So we did take emergency action to have that repaired right away, but we did not have that available when we were dealing with the snow pictures that were out there. This is other equipment. But again, you know, I've seen enough 20 and 30-inch snowstorms. A 10 to 16-inch snowstorm doesn't typically concern us because we can typically deal with those locations. The drifting was another issue because it wasn't 10 to 16 inches out here. It was feet out here in some very difficult locations. But snow presents other problems, and believe it or not, the type of snow is very much a piece of that. And this snow, because the weather was so cold, was very fine. It was like grains of sand, and they blew around tremendously. And long in the industry, we've had a problem with traction motors. Traction motors are the things that make an axle turn, make the wheel move that drives the train. Traction motors are electric devices. They spin, they turn the gearbox turns the axle. Traction motors have typically been what are called DC traction motors, direct current as opposed to alternating current. Direct current traction motors are only on older fleet. That was the technology back then. The M7 fleet that represents the majority of our fleet, our AC traction motors, typically do not have a problem. In fact, when you go to one of these trade shows, they will show you a traction motor running while submerged in water to prove that moisture does not affect them. But it does impact DC traction motors. We lost about half our fleet of M3 cars due to that snowstorm, which represents 7 to 10 trains, depending what the makeup of the cars is. Again, it's a huge impact. We've got to bring them in. We've got to change the traction motors out. And it's, well, how do you prepare for that many burn-up traction motors? Well, we prepare by having what we call a snowbank, and that is a whole bunch of rebuilt traction motors sitting in the shop waiting for failures to come in so we don't run out of traction motors when we're faced with these type snow events. It's traditional in the industry. If you look in the M3 cars and you've ever ridden in them, the MTA years ago, in the middle of the car, there's a single seat because there's a huge monstrosity box that runs up to the ceiling from the floor. Well, that box is to try and to suck in air because traction motors need air to cool, and to have the moisture that's captured in that air filtered out before it can get into those cars. So for years we've been trying to deal with this. AC traction motors is the solution. What I will say is our M3 cars, this is their last winter. They go out of service next year. We have M9 cars that are going to be delivered, and that's one less problem that's out there, but the impact is very severe. This snow also affects the same stuff that I talked about mechanically, airlines, that type of stuff. It gets sucked into orifices and that type of stuff, and we need to get it out and heat it up more than anything else. One of the other things that we're very susceptible to in a snowstorm, particularly one this cold when the snow just froze, is we had more cars on the tracks at grade crossings than you normally would expect. Whether they're turning there or sliding off the road and go into there, we had a tremendous number of these events that occurred during a snowstorm. Fourth thing I want to mention, and it's not on the Metro North one because it only affects the Long Island Railroad, and that has been the performance of the infrastructure of Amtrak that affects our train movements into and out of Penn Station. We've been through a series of events over a number of weeks here. I'm sorry, I'm leaning back. I'll bring it up. A series of events over a number of weeks where we've had infrastructure failures on the Amtrak line. It has involved, we've lost tunnel tubes due to track conditions. We've had trains break down in tunnel tubes because of a loss of catenary power. We lost power because of a Con Ed issue 3 times in one day on a Friday that took down the entire power system for Penn Station, including PSCC and the ability to route trains. All of us were shut down 3 times that day for 20-minute periods while the power was restored there. And, you know, as luck would have it, when these things occur, nobody knows why they occur. So they occurred a second and a third time throughout the day. So that's a problem. We had one of our trains that called in a track condition while entering line 3 last week before, because what they termed a dip in the rail, we bottomed out. And that means, you know, it's like hitting a pothole in the road, but it's a pothole in the rail system. And literally the suspension system bottomed out to the point that it wasn't absorbed by shock absorbers or springs. We went down to metal on metal where you hit an absolute stop and bottomed out. That track has been slow ordered for several days now. They did fix it over this past weekend, but it shut down line 3. When it shut down line 3, they have to get people out there to inspect it. At rush hour, that's not the easiest thing to do, but the line is shut down. In the meantime, we had 12 trains between Jamaica and Penn Station that are backed up that can't get in because concurrently they had the issue with a train breaking down in line 1. It's been one disaster after another at Penn Station. Amtrak needs to do better. You all know they've got a state of good repair program ongoing. It's not going fast enough. We need to absolutely keep whatever pressure we can on Amtrak to have them perform the work that needs to be done, but it's just unacceptable. Our passengers are paying the price for them ignoring for too long a period of time the conditions in Penn Station, allowing them to deteriorate to a completely unacceptable level. As we all know, last year we had the 3 derailments that involved, thankfully, Amtrak and New Jersey Transit trains, but same thing. They were able to jump in there last summer and do that work to correct a lot of those situations in that area where the derailments occurred, because they had all the material. This is special track work that has a lead time to buy of a year or more. Okay, they had all that material over in New Jersey because they bought it sometime before that. They knew that needed to be replaced. They just never got around to doing it. Well, again, it's unacceptable, and we need to go after them and have them perform better. I'm going to go on to a couple other things that I want to talk about, but if anybody wants to talk about service and ask questions on the service, it's probably appropriate we do that now.
Why don't we do that now? Any comments on Pat's report so far? Ira?
Well, it's less so about December and the issues we face with the storm, but more of a long-term thing. I mean, if we're going to talk about now the indicators in the back of the book, and one that's concerned me over time is the categories delay, particularly engineering. This last year, again, there's been a significant increase in delays attributable to engineering problems. I just wonder if there's a resource issue or what the issue is that we see this, problem. I think engineering means signaling. I'm not sure, and some other things, but
Engineering, track, signals, bridges, you name it, okay? That said, typically we break that down into 2 subcategories, planned and unplanned. So planned is when we're doing maintenance work. That's scheduled, whether we're doing a bridge replacement like we did out in Westbury on a weekend and we shut down and we incur some delays because of that. We have a track gang out there installing ties or grinding the head of the rail that I talked about. Those things that are scheduled and planned, we try to advise customers ahead of time when we're going to have those events and to anticipate 5, 10, 15-minute delays, whatever that may be. But the unplanned ones were the things that I've just talked about, where switches go out of alignment, where we lose power feeds, where we wind up with a broken rail or what have you. They are the events that we're trying to prevent from happening, that we need to do better and prevent from happening. And, we've got plans in place that I've talked about, ways we try and deal with some of these things and do more about it. So,
but that doesn't include maintenance of equipment. Maintenance of equipment is a separate category.
I didn't say maintenance of equipment.
I know, but it's this failure. You talked a lot about failures of our equipment due as a result of the snowstorm. That's not included. I mean, engineering unscheduled is the one that seems to me to be something in our control. That seems to be something that we should be addressing. And you said track, signals, etc. And I hope there's a strategy to do that. This has been something that's been, I don't know, a problem maybe for a couple of years now. As far as I remember, if someone wants to correct me, please go ahead. But this seems to be getting worse over a long period of time.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure where you want to go. I don't disagree that we need to do better with infrastructure failures throughout the system.
Scott?
Pat, it sounds like listening to you're saying that everything that can go wrong went wrong. And, I've had over the last number of weeks people that are, regular riders of the Long Island Railroad said this is the worst they've ever seen it. And that, and they think back from the summer of hell and how well we did, right? We set the expectations, we beat the expectations, and here we find ourselves where people would expect us to be able to perform on a normal basis. Forget the snowstorm for a second, although we should talk about that, but on a normal basis. And so we do well in a crisis, but not when things are normal. And the first thing I want to ask you is, you've been doing this a long time. From your perspective, is this the worst you've ever seen it, and why? Or have there been other periods of time that have been similar to this?
Well, I'll talk mainly about my experience here. Before the summer of hell, we had a very difficult stretch that ran through last winter and into the spring as well. Then the summer came. As you said, we did better. Through the fall, we did better. If you look at our numbers through the fall, they were pretty good. But come December and January, they have been terrible. Have I seen stretches like this before? Yeah, I mean, we saw it last year. When Amtrak was having the derailments that I talked about in Penn Station. Anytime you do anything or anything goes wrong to a tunnel tube or Penn Station or that type of stuff, because we operate at max capacity, the impacts and the recovery time are tremendous. It's not just about something that gets caught up in it. It's about trains for an hour or two afterwards until we can get things back running on schedule.
And in essence, what would you have done different? I mean, you talked about you knew the yards were closed, for example, on the west side, and you knew we took cars off because of the wheels. I mean, what, in retrospect, what lessons have we learned that we would try to do different if we were approaching a season like this again?
Well, again, going back to slippery rail, there's a number of things we do. One, we have very aggressive brush cutting programs up and down our right-of-way to remove the source of some of that. Two, we'll start in the end of September with our cleaning of the railheads and our application of the traction gel and that type of stuff. So we try to stay ahead of that.
But did you do that this year?
Yeah.
So I'm saying,
every night.
What did you not do this year that you've learned that you should have done this year?
Well, we definitely operated at the edge in terms of those wheel throwing machines that I talked about when we took the one out at West Side Yard. That impacted us, and it has taken more time than it should have to get it back, and we need it back. We do not have enough wheel throwing machines to deal with events like happened that week.
Right. You know, one of the things we also learned, and both with the subway side of the equation and the Summer of Hell, is the communication and how critical that is. And that, you can always talk about everything going wrong, you can't control it. The inability to effectively communicate to the customer. I mean, there were stories of people that, that had trains delayed over 2 hours, yet if you looked at the LIRR website, it said there was 15-minute delays, and story after story of a lack of communication. I mean, that is, is clearly a failure on our part. And how do we get ahead of that? What happened, and where do you go from there? It
clearly is, and if you go through some of these events and you look at how information flows through our system between our folks to the customer, because it's a series of discussions and, okay, this is what we're going to say, this is what we're going to put out, type of thing. One of the issues that has long bothered me, or since my arrival here at Long Island Railroad, was the lack of a centralized control center for the Long Island Railroad. We have what we call a movement bureau, which is our office 204, where we are in communication with towers, 11 towers throughout the system that are actually controlling the train movements and talking to the trains. We are in discussion with power dispatchers who are located in Hillside Complex, not in the same room. My experience is we need to have a control center where we have not only people moving the trains, but people putting out customer information, where we have power dispatchers, where we have signal trouble desks. So when a switch goes out of alignment, they've got a maintainer on the move there like that. They know about it like that. They're not waiting for a phone call from somebody to come to them, because right now our power dispatchers, our signal trouble desk is also at Hillside. So we don't have anything like that. I'll give you another example. We had an issue with a car on the tracks, and we have communication that involves the involvement of Owens people trying to do it, trying to get to the scene, to get the car towed off the tracks that are out there. That involves people going into the track area where we have live third rail. We've got to protect those people properly, so that requires certain people to talk to certain people. None of those people are in the same room. That's a problem.
But is someone responsible, like in terms of the communication? Like, I mean, the fact that there says 15 minutes online when you're over 2 hours. There's not one person or two people that are accountable to making sure that that is corrected?
I'm not sure what you mean, one or two people.
Who is ultimately responsible for putting this information on the website?
We have a personal information center that puts it on the website, that sends out service advisories to our customers that people sign up for. I'm a rider of Port Washington branch. Any service advisories on the Port Washington, send them to me. So all those messages are consistent. We have the signs in the station. The most challenging thing to me is trying to have things happen in the time frame that you would normally expect them to happen. Is very dependent on our ability to communicate amongst ourselves, and to some extent to tell the customers when they can expect things to happen. People generally want to know, when are we going to start moving again? You know, when I'm sitting there with an Amtrak train broken down in a tunnel tube, and I'm trying to guess how long is it going to take before I can get that train moved, that's where it gets difficult, because I don't know.
Right. But I mean, clearly, and what's troubling to me is that you can't always control the tracks, you can't always control the equipment, you can't always control the weather, but we should be able to control our communication amongst ourselves. That's just, failure on our part, right? And whether it's whether we create a communication center for these types of times where people are in the same room that are out there and have that sense of urgency, but it's unacceptable for the riders to not be able to know and make alternative plans, right? And even you think about your comment on the snow, which I appreciate to the point in terms of what it did to the equipment and the challenge of moving it. During that period of time, the community at large is already geared up to a recognition that they're going to have to modify what their plans are, right? There's late days of work is closed, schools are closed. So, in that instance, we could be more proactive in that there. I mean, maybe we should take a page out of the airlines books and not risk having our equipment fail, knowing the challenges that are out there, and be proactive on canceling more trains so that we don't have equipment fail during the storm that now we can't book back into service for weeks at a time, like they do with the planes before a storm comes.
You've seen more and more of that in our industry, trying to protect the equipment. It's walking a line, trying to figure out, did I bring people in? Do I need to try and keep things running to get them home, type thing. But cancellation of trains, of service potentially, usually our comment is up to about 12 inches is about the point that we need to shut down, because one thing we always try to avoid is stranding a train somewhere with people trapped on board. So that's sort of where we get into that danger zone. This storm got right up to that number.
Again, and you may want to, this is not for an answer today, but that's probably something worth looking at, because if you think about this storm, there were days in advance people were talking about the bomb, right? Everyone, so everyone was preparing for it. So in that instance, you give yourself flexibility to be able to be more proactive because then people, if you're communicating to customers, you won't leave them stranded, because if you say, based on the forecast, we will likely not have this train returning, so they won't go into the city or to their, use the transit to get there. But, again, communication and being proactive are things that are in our control. Equipment failure, I understand, may not be. We could be, again, trying to protect it. And then even on communication, you've raised Amtrak. This is the first sort of I'm hearing in terms of their delays. At the first meeting when the Amtrak Penn Station work, the more recent Penn Station work that was being done for what we call, this winter work, it was really downplayed as something of going to be an issue compared to the summer of hell. And I think maybe where we missed that was not calibrating the weather element in conjunction with that work adds, another weight to the branch, to the whole system. And so, I think thinking about that as well, and again, communicating an expectation setting is key. And like even now, they're supposed to be done the end of May, I think, right, was the date?
Yeah.
Is that, are they?
You may be
schedule?
missing something here, okay? And that was my next item to talk about Amtrak's State of Good repair effort that they just started, okay? They've taken a station track out of service and they're rebuilding that track, okay? My complaint is not about the work they're doing there. That piece of the plan is actually functioning as designed, and the weather has not compounded that issue, okay? And when I say that, it's because we knew that track was out of service. We're working without that track being in service. Under certain circumstances, it could bite us a little bit, but that's not the issue. My complaint is more about that they've allowed things to deteriorate in too many places that aren't being worked on at this point in time, that have the potential to buy us, that aren't part of the plan. The work that runs through May is just replacement of 2 station tracks in Penn Station. There's a tremendous amount of other work that still needs to be done there that is not yet part of the plan. They've committed to working there, but there's a lot more work to do.
Right,
It's not over in May.
And that's clear, but at the same token, we can see when you take tracks off the challenges. So it's finding the balance, and that's something that has to be done. But do we know if they're on track for May? For that?
Yeah, they've only been at it 2 weeks, and yeah, they're doing
Well, that's something
fine.
we should, again, be monitoring and communicating to us so that we all have a sense and our riders have a sense. My last question, do you think that we need a Long Island Railroad action plan, like we put together a subway action plan to address the crisis that we're facing?
Absolutely.
So is that something you were working on to present to the chairman, or what's?
Yeah, we've had discussions about preparing that. You heard his comments a week ago, I guess it was, a little more than a week. So yes, we've had some discussions on that and had some discussions about some of the things that need to be in that plan.
So, just in conclusion, I would just encourage thinking about
A centralized command center and the inadequacy of the communication system at stations. We've complained about it when things are good, and when things are bad, it only time. I've said in the last 2 capital plans, it is time for us to invest the money necessary to make those systems work and to give us a centralized command center. It is essential. You can't run a railroad over 100 miles from 20 different locations. You can only run it from one location. And until we invest the money to do that, we will continue to have problems that could be significantly improved by a centralized command center. And we all understand the communication system at the stations is far beyond its adequacy. We're hoping that the new advertising program, which includes Long Island Railroad information at the stations, will help, but that's not happening tomorrow, even though we passed, we approved the contract last year. And that is also going to hopefully help, but those 2 systems are clearly inadequate.
Yeah, and when you say systems, the advertising contract will put new screens out there. That'll be hopefully more legible and easier to read and that type of stuff, but they aren't they do nothing for the information.
Right.
The information that's contained is on us.
Right.
And
That's on the railroad.
People should know. I mean, they could sign up and get text sent to them, right? And the posting of the latest.
Yeah, we have a lot of people signed up for social media. I can get you the numbers, but off the top of my head, I don't know.
But obviously, we're not giving them the right information.
Chuck? I'm sorry, Chuck.
2 things, if I may. First, with respect to communication, there apparently is no provision for the necessary work to be done within the framework of the current capital plan. But I wonder whether you cannot use internal staff now to frame out what it would take to provide an adequate communication system.
Chuck,
To lay out
we've done that.
exactly what we need.
We've brought experts on. We have a consulting contract with experts on control centers who are now working and preparing a transition plan for us to be able to get from where we are today to where we want to get to.
Then it seems to me that the next step ought to be to release that plan so that people know what has to be done and what it will cost, so that it is on the front of people's minds when it comes to framing a budget.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, the second point I wanted to make was Amtrak and your statement that there's other work that has to be done over and above the 2 tracks at Penn Station. Does the Long Island Railroad have a list of that other work that it can, and in my view should, make public as well, so that everybody is on notice that this work needs to get done?
Is there a list of work? Yes. Is there a schedule for all that work at this point in time? No. That what they are, everybody's focused on the one station track that's out of service. There is work that goes on in other areas every night and every weekend. So it's not just the one station track that's out of service. We tend to focus on the peak hours because that's when most of the people ride, and when you take a station track out of service, the peak hours are the ones that are impacted the most. That station track not being there at 10 o'clock at night doesn't cause any service issues, okay?
That I apparently wasn't clear. What I was focusing on was the following. If there is other work that is not scheduled as of this moment by Amtrak, but that in the view of the Long Island Railroad poses an imminent threat or an imminent problem, it seems to me that it behooves the Long Island Railroad to release that information so that the world is on notice that we did not wait, that we put Amtrak on notice.
Chuck, we can do that based upon the failures we've seen. We can't do that based upon our inspection of their facilities, because we don't do that. We don't inspect their facilities.
You can only do that which
we can
you are
link it to
able-
the service impacts it's had on us, absolutely.
Pat, you can only do that which you are able to do. But I think you owe an obligation to do that which you have an ability to do, to put them on notice. Here's what you guys got to do, and if you don't do it, you're going to have to pay the price.
And part of that is obviously the tunnels, for which there is a schedule of repairs. And luckily, we haven't gotten to that time yet, because when that happens, it may even be worse than it is now with regard to the effects, because there are only 4 tunnels and we only use 2.5, and we're going to lose.
We're going to lose one.
We're going to lose 1. So when we go down to 1.5 tunnels, and what is that? 2019, I think it is.
Yeah.
Whenever.
And that's not a firm date.
Right. That was the date that they had said to us. We'll go from there. Unfortunately, we are totally independent in that regard, in that situation. Ira, did you have your hand up, and then Norman?
Yeah, quickly, about information. The information we provide on social media is social media. I mean, mostly our email and text alerts is more often than not inadequate. I mean, there's people who say there's trains that are canceled. There's no notice in the email alert. There's no notice at the platform. I mean, during this particular incident, but it's so common that the information that the passenger gets is woefully inadequate. I've been told time and again we need a central control center. We need this. I know a central control center is in the capital plan, isn't it?
The 15 to 19, there's enough money to do this study that I talked about.
Yeah, that's it.
But
right?
that's
But I mean,
it.
our plan is for the next, right.
Right.
So, I mean, we have to have some other way of doing that, because we can't, in a way, we're promising to provide some type of up-to-date information by saying people sign up for these text and email alerts, and then we provide stuff that's incorrect, and it makes people more angry than if they had no information. And the announcements on the train aren't quite what they should be, probably because the crews don't know. I mean, since I've been on the board, I've heard that we're working to improve it. I haven't seen, there's some times when we've seen some improvement. I know we've hired more employees to deal with the situation, but I do think we need to show the public that there's a plan for us to improve that, as well as address some of the and not just the problems that we face in a snowstorm, but the ongoing, I mean, it was in our own statistics show there's more problems on with engineering, whatever it is, tracks, signals. I think a lot of people see signals as an issue because that's the alerts they see. I don't know if those are the issues, but it would be good if we had a plan to show we were addressing those and made it public. As far as Amtrak goes, well, we're faced with a real difficult choice here. I understand one of the choices was to put off their work in the East River tunnels until East Side Access was open. If that's not done, then we are faced with losing a great amount of service for an extended period of time. And I was for choosing the wait till East Side Access opens, but I don't know. Someone should assess, whether it be us independently or Amtrak or someone else, and assess the condition of the East River tubes so a judgment can be made, an unbiased judgment can be made of whether it can wait, or something should be done now, or some piece of it should be done now, or close the tube before East Side Access. But that we need to do that and show the public we're doing that. And we can't. I don't think it's acceptable to say we're just going to let Amtrak do it anymore. I think we have to impose upon Amtrak to get an independent view of the condition of those tunnels.
Norman?
I guess I want to compliment what Ira was saying, but with regard to the communications, you can't have enough of it. But, what was it Mark Twain said, that a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth puts its boots on? So I really think you got to focus on the accuracy of what you're communicating rather than the immediacy. You can't keep up with the sort of internet gossip network that is set up for you to compete against. You just can't. So focusing on the accuracy of what you say is more important than the lightning speed with which you get it out there. And you make strong decisions and forceful decisions. Maybe it takes you a little more thinking time before you start putting the messages out, rather than put out a message that is in some way blurry or inaccurate. Now, the other thing I'd like to speak on is to kind of, I'm not even pushing back on what Scott was saying, but there is a line. You have to draw lines in when to shut down service, clearly. But historically, the railroads used the diesel fleet to clear track for electric power to follow. And at a certain point, you say, now we can run the electric. Well, my considered opinion as a diesel mechanic and having worked the territory, that your diesel fleet is so feeble, you're forced to draw the line further and further down the snowstorm chain of where you should be. Now, as you go into a procurement on fleet procurement strategy, you should have in mind for your diesel fleet procurement hardiness of the fleet in the snowstorm. Or at least that's my indication. So, because you will always have to make that decision, is when do we shut down service? Well, one of the big advantages of the railroad over the highway is that you can run in much more inclement weather. And I just don't like to see the railroad put in a position of sort of a lose-lose or win-win choice, depending on how you look at it, where you can't go wrong shutting service down. And it really sort of devalues the whole purpose of having a railroad. So I think you should have a strategy of let's try to get hardy enough equipment so we can run in a snowstorm.
Yeah, and as I talked about the traction motors, that's a very small percentage of our fleet. That's the older cars. But we very much, especially given the newer technology, we are monitoring vehicles that are out there running for their current draw through the third rail. So we are able to ascertain whether or not we're starting to run into trouble with losing third rail contact based on real-time readings that are continuously monitored in a snowstorm. So we do stay on top of that, and that's usually what we utilize to decide when we need to shut down. Okay, we don't, as I said, want to get a car or a train stranded somewhere with passengers on board, that because we lose connectivity with the third rail. So that is monitored regularly. when we start seeing slippage, we'll run the alcohol train out there, the icing train, to try and improve the situation. Quite often, we will no longer stop at certain stations because you're in much greater danger of losing connectivity when you stop than when you're traveling at regular speed. So there are things we're doing continuously in a snowstorm to monitor the situation and to make that decision on a real-time basis. You know, I thought Scott's point was more along the lines of, at some point in time, you got to consider the damage to the equipment and the subsequent delays that are out of there. And that's very much true for the M3 fleet. The M7 fleet doesn't quite have the same issues with it in terms of traction motors. All mechanical equipment is going to have problems in extreme cold and snow. That said, sometimes it's just bringing them into a shop and warming them up and you're good to go again. It's not changing out a traction motor. That could take hours and hours and hours.
And the other thing is with regard to the leaves, you know, your capacity is substantially, you know, when you think about, you had 3 wheel truing machines before, and now you have 2. That's the 30% loss in capacity, and at some point somebody has to realize that occurred. Now the other thing about the leaves is it's a complete and total crapshoot, not even with regard to like climate change or nothing, as to when and how those leaves fall. And I think, you know, if you have a bad year, and this was apparently statistically the worst year you've had, I think in the good years you're just going to have to take credit for, we did a great job this year, the leaves fell at the right time. Yeah, I mean, and if people can't live up to that and understand that, then, you know, or you can, you know, buy 10 wheel truing machines. And
well, but, you know, we've got to acquire things like wheel truing machines so that we can prevent as much as possible the impact to the fleet when we do get a real bad day. And most of this stuff occurred in the course of one day in terms of the impact on the fleet. So, you know, we do need to be better prepared to deal with days like that so they don't have the impact on us that they had on us.
Okay. Pat, did you have anything else to add?
I was just going to talk about the state of good repair, but more from a rider perspective in terms of what we're seeing. We are seeing more people go to Atlantic Terminal and Hunters Point Avenue, obviously, because we've directed trains there. We're also seeing an increase in early morning people going into this city. Some people are leaving earlier now than they have been in our past experience. So we are seeing that going on. Finally, I wanted to mention ridership, and, you know, given with the discussions on December, it should surprise no one that in December we saw a 2.6% drop in ridership compared to last December of last year. So it was a tremendous impact. That said, we finished 2016 with the same ridership, 89.2 million as 2016, which is still, we've tied our modern day record for ridership. So we're still moving a lot of people. It is important we continue to do so, and we do the things to allow ridership to grow and people to feel better about their commutes.
Okay. Anybody else? Safety report?
In the interest of time, 2 things. Our safety report documenting our safety performance through the month of November can be found on page 96 in your book. I also wanted to alert you to the fact that on February 6th, the National Transportation Safety Board, at their regularly scheduled board meeting, will be unveiling their special investigative report into end-of-track collisions. As part of that report, they will be reviewing our Atlantic Terminal incident that took place on January 4th of 2017. So we look forward to their findings and recommendations, and we'll report back to you after that February 6th meeting. The report, as I said, is on page 96, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions on that? I will, obviously, the significant increase in grade crossing incidents in that 12-month period as opposed to the previous 12-month period is, of course, alarming.
And our challenge, again, is the majority of the incidents are a couple of factors. The majority are people violating downed gates and crossing protection. That's the driver behavior is the most significant contributor, or folks that were fouling the crossing, and we all know that you're not supposed to enter the crossing, just like a traffic intersection. You're not supposed to enter that area unless you know that you can clear to the other side, where they then found themselves in a position as the gates and the the crossing protection activated, that they were unable to get out of the way in time of the trains. But human behavior continues to be our biggest challenge. And as we've discussed, we're piloting different interventions at different crossings and looking forward to continuing to work with the police on enforcement and education efforts.
Chuck, did you have a question on that?
Do we have cameras at the grade crossings?
We actually are working on, and I don't know if it's okay to comment on that, but we're actually working to implement cameras at a number of crossings, and they're built into some of our
Why not at
rehabilitations.
all?
I'm sorry?
Why not at all of the grade crossings?
Strategically, we're working through that right now with the goal
The
of trying to
governor's,
get
the
it.
governor's
Yeah.
budget, I think Vanessa mentioned this at the, Veronica mentioned it at Metro North meeting. The governor's budget includes language to allow, or maybe allow is not the correct term. My legal people down at the other end will probably give me the correct term.
It's like a pilot.
But a pilot to
program.
encourage, and maybe it's more than encourage, cooperation between MTA and the local municipalities. Remember, in many cases, the grade crossing is on a local street, and the camera has to be on the local street. And not only do we need permission to put the camera up, we also need permission to enforce what the camera sees in that regard. And so we're hopeful that the governor's budget language will be enacted to make that more palatable in that regard. Is that a
Yeah.
fair statement?
That's accurate. The budget bill provides authorization to both the commuter railroads, LIRR and Metro North, and the local roadway authorities to institute a camera enforcement program with adjudication in local courts having jurisdiction.
Right.
With fines that go to the municipality, not to the railroads, and with an obligation to report back to the legislature and the governor on the effectiveness of what's been put in place. There's a provision that authorizes the railroads and a parallel provision which authorizes the roadway authorities to cooperate and put this together.
Because it's one thing to put the camera up, the next thing is to enforce what the camera sees and adjudicate it against the perpetrator. So you need a combination of both in that context, and this will provide a start in that regard, if the legislature agrees.
It has express provisions on enforcement, and it has the kinds of provisions you would expect. If a car is stolen, the owner is obviously not liable for a violation. If a car is rented, there are provisions dealing with that, and there are monetary penalties up to a certain limit adjudicable in local courts. Yes.
Okay.
But Chuck, to answer your question, I think I told you some time ago that I decided to put cameras in at crossings where we were doing signal work. So that effort is underway. We have a project with Spionk de Montauk. Those crossings will be getting cameras. We have a Long Beach signal project. We have a third track project. We have a number of projects going on. Or I shouldn't say the third track, the double track project going on. And all of those, we're making the effort to add cameras where we can as part of our normal business. Problem is, we have 300 crossings. It's a major effort to do so, and
Pat, I'm not a fan of cameras.
I know,
But
I am, Chuck.
I've never have been. But the fact is, the kamikaze pilots that you have driving the roads on these grade crossings are putting in danger the lives of passengers and others. And something has to affirmatively be done.
Well, we can only hope that the cameras will help. Will they solve the problem? No. The only way to solve the problem is to eliminate the 300 and plus grade crossings we have on Long Island and the commensurate number they have in the Metro North territory. That's clearly not going to happen in any appreciable period of time, but we can only try to make them as safe, and if cameras are part of that, so be it.
With respect, Mitch, I recognize that the perfect cannot be achieved with dispatch. But by the same token, I don't want the perfect to get in the way of the good.
Right.
And so let's get it done to the extent we can.
Absolutely. Anything else, Pat? No. We're done? Okay. Capital construction?
Mr. Chairman, the third track project, which the board approved at its last meeting, is moving quickly. Moving forward, we had a notice of award and a notice to proceed to the CM team since you met. We've had a notice of award to the design build team. Notice to proceed is probably going to happen within a matter of days. There was a few insurance items that need to be cleared up. And in the meantime, the design build team and the Long Island forces have begun working on all the logistics. They're walking the length of the right-of-way. And there's been a temporary team office established at the JCC. A permanent design build team office is pretty close to being leased, and all of the staffing on our side, the Long Island team, my folks at Capital Construction, and the CM are being formed into a team very quickly. We're literally going through person by person on the CM to make sure we have a good fit. So I think we're all pretty happy. That's obviously an important project, apropos of everything that Pat talked about, because of the way that the operation of the main line and the capacity limitations do create cascading delays through the entire Long Island Railroad system. And, to the extent that we're able to pull this project off timely, it will go a long way to addressing that challenge. There is a report in your materials about East Side access. I just want to make a couple comments. One is we are looking forward to touring the board on the East Side Access Project next month. I think it's very important that all of you have, a chance to see the very significant progress that's being made, and so that as we continue to dialogue about this hugely important project, we're all talking about some of the particulars and the challenges that we face together. We toured County Executive Balone of Suffolk County and the new Nassau County Executive in the last couple of weeks. I thought that was very useful and important. But because of what the New York Times wrote in December, I do want to just take a quick moment to talk about East Side access and some of the implications of of the focus on that project's costs and what we're doing about it. Obviously, many of the cost drivers that were identified in the East Side article by the Times, such as labor agreements governing pay and work rules, are not entirely under the MTA's control. But as stewards of the capital program, we obviously have an obligation, and we've acknowledged that there are many, many issues that we do control in the effort to rein in capital project costs. So what are we doing about it? Well, on new projects like the third track, we are doing important things, and I just want to underscore them to give the board some confidence that we are learning from the lessons of the past. Obviously, third track is a design-build project, and the point of that is to maximize value by empowering the contractor to coordinate design and construction, which eliminates interactions and submissions and bureaucracy that frequently can cause negative impacts to cost and schedule. And importantly, we talked about it last month, before awarding the procurement, we had and even before we actually issued the RFP, we had extensive interactions with the contracting community to result in a better understanding of the risks and complexities of the job, so that when we did go to RFP and when we did evaluate teams, we would have a clear understanding of they would have a clear understanding of the risks and the complexities, and hopefully it informed their bids in a positive way. But really focusing on risk allocation before actually getting into procurement, I think, was a huge step forward. As I said, we're working with all the Long Island team, the CM team, and the folks at Capital Construction to create, for once, a truly integrated project development team right from the beginning. And we're engaging much more than I think has been the case in the past with local community leaders. That we have to involve them and, as you say, give them forewarning of what's happening so that people understand the expectations level, as Commissioner Reckler was referring to, is properly set. So that's on the third track. But on the ESA, on East Side Access, we are making some progress implementing recommendations that I alluded to when I presented to you in October. We've made adjustments to the change order process and are making progress on eliminating the backlog, and that's a huge primary goal that I've set. We are continuing to work with the systems contractor and the railroad and specialty consultants on taking a new approach to schedule, which emphasizes incremental systems testing. Remember, I talked about the schedule importance of getting the testing going, ideally on a geographic east to west basis, so that we didn't just wait for see if all the systems worked once they were completed, but we have clear indications as we go along. And we are under Pat's leadership, we are embedding the Long Island Railroad folks who are assigned to this project and who handle a lot of the back and forth about design and outages and so on in the East Side Access Project team, for better or worse. That is a new step to actually eliminate some of the back and forth and have them sitting in the same place, similar to some of the points that were made about overall rail system coordination at Long Island. So obviously those are some initial steps. I'm going to come back to the board in March with a CPOC report, which will get at some of the schedule and budget status issues. But in the meantime, in addition, Chairman Loda has, together with the board, has set forward a series of steps, creating some task forces on key issues, and one of them is the cost containment task force led by Commissioner Reckler. So through that, we've begun meeting. We're frankly talking about some major steps forward, about throwing away antiquated process, writing entirely new contract terms, considering legislative changes where necessary, and wherever possible to focus on streamlining construction practices to stimulate competition. So we hopefully, over time, it's not going to happen overnight, but we have to convince the contracting community that working for us is appealing as a way to make a decent profit, but also is time efficient. So those are some of the initial steps. And Commissioner Reckler, I think you at this point might want to make some comments about where the task force is headed.
Sure. Thanks, John. So, we had a meeting with our cost containment working group, and obviously it goes beyond Long Island Railroad. So I'll say some of the comments more broadly for the board meeting, but I think there's no sugarcoating it, right? Our project delivery system is broken, and we're putting we have layers and layers of processes and different organizational structures and silos that has made this very challenging for our team to execute. So even when I say this is broken, I would say it's structurally broken, and maybe there's some personnel things, but I think our personnel are handcuffed in many cases to operate efficiently, and I think it's got to be very frustrating for them to have to live through this whole process. But I think the big theme was if we're going to really fix the cost containment as we go forward, it's not going to be about peeling back layers of the onion. It's going to get to the core. And so to say, if we were going to do this from scratch and not have to deal with legacy process and regulatory items, what would you do? And how would you what would the contract look like? What would the change order process look like? What would the process between, in terms of the oversight and organizational structure to better integrate operations and the teams? And that's something that we've asked Jano and the task force to work with us and to try to develop. And similarly, we've been working with Commissioner Murther in terms of the procurement side, because they do merge, and we're going to have a joint working group session in the next couple of weeks to bring those two pieces together. So, I mean, the hope is to come up with a handful of dramatic suggestions that unencumber the agency from not having the ability to execute as effectively and efficiently as possible. And we can't keep asking the public for more money and to fund and higher fares if we can't prove that we can allocate those funds effectively and efficiently. So that's key. I do want to echo Jana's point as it relates to the third track, because I do think that this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that if you start correctly from the beginning, develop the right scope, identify the right risk, use the design-build structure, something that should work. And I think that as we go through that process, being able to use that as a case study will help inform us as we think about the other models going forward.
Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. Any other questions on? Yes, Norman?
Yeah, I asked somebody last month regarding parking contract that was part of East Side Access, I believe. It was $84 million. I asked you how many parking spots you were getting for that.
I mean, it's part of third track, I think.
Third track, yeah,
Third track,
excuse me.
that's what I meant. Yeah, that's what I thought you meant. Right.
Well, we'll check on the exact number, and if we owed you a response, I apologize. But the real issue on the parking is that we are trying to, and the board gave us a clear direction that you wanted to optimize value capture opportunities, and that was probably the most significant one that existed on this project as it sat in December. So we are continuing to look for ways to, even where there were commitments made to create parking, because the EIS required it, we want to do something in tandem with a rational development strategy, which will serve the opportunity for the MTA to capture some value of the land in addition to putting parking on it, and also to create a more transit-oriented development and a more walkable pedestrian environment around the railroad station. So while we'll answer the question on the number of parking spaces, the focus has been on optimizing those bigger policy goals. The commitment on the number of spaces was in response to the EIS.
You have foreseen my follow-up questions. I mean, obviously, after I find out how much you're spending on each parking spot, I want to know how that leads to value capture, and how that leads to transit-oriented development, and how that leads to walkable communities and all those things. But on the face of it, any parking is, I know it's necessary, especially in the suburbs. It's the main cap on your ability of your riders to access the stations. However, it's also problematic in that it's usually some of the most valuable property closest to the station. You're committing to parking. So I'm always curious as to what you're paying for each one of those parking spaces, and then how you're going to monetize it going forward. If if you pay, what is it? If it costs you 20 grand per parking space, if you're going to make 20 grand a year, I think you made a pretty good deal. But I think a lot of it will come out in the numbers.
Well, why don't we just give you a full-on response that will circulate to the members of the committee?
I know those conversations are taking place because I know those conversations are taking place because a number of people have talked to me about it, especially with regard to redevelopment in Hicksville and the parking garages that are designed to go there, and the redevelopment of the Hicksville area into a transit-oriented development component along with the project. So I know those conversations are going on.
I know those conversations are going on, too. If I was part of them, I wouldn't be asking you questions.
I understand. I understand. Chief, police report.
Good morning. System-wide for the month of December, there were a total of 24 versus 26 major felonies. That's a decrease of 8%. For the year 2017, there were 271 major crimes versus 307. That's down 36 or 12%. This is the lowest amount of year-end crime ever recorded in the 20-year history of the MTA PD. Long Island Railroad for the year, we were 106 versus 126, down 20 crimes. Now, I would like to thank the members of the MTA Police Department and the Office of Security for their outstanding response to the subway corridor attack of December 11th. The men and women of the MTA PD worked very long, hard hours that day, and every day since then, up through the end of the year. I'd like to think their contribution actually contributed to a safe and uneventful New Year's Eve. As I mentioned in the last meeting, the hate crime report, we had 29 versus 22 crimes last year. That's an increase of 7. All but 2 involved graffiti.
Any questions? Chuck?
Chief, let me deal with your last point first and then the statistics. Graffiti cannot be so easily dismissed. The inscription, as you see, one of your major increases each and every month has been anti-Semitic incidents and hate crimes throughout the system. Graffiti was the precursor to the rise of Nazism in Europe. The writing of the word Jude on the windows of shops was something that was a precursor to disaster because people ignored it. I respectfully submit that if you have areas where this kind of stuff goes on, it would behoove you to do exactly what you did at, I believe it was Penn Station, namely have decoys there and nail these mamzerim, because this has got to stop. You cannot excuse each and every month a meteoric increase in hate crimes. Just is inexcusable. Turning to the other statistics, I have a problem with 3 of them, if I may. Felony assaults were up. Drug offenses, meteorically up, doubled. Sex offenses, up. What, why, and what are you doing about it?
Well, first, the assaults. Every one of those assaults are on police officers working Penn Station, Grand Central. Disorderly turns into an assault on arrests. Our officers have been extremely active in enforcing quality of life and other crimes, and they are running into this type of behavior from resisting and assaulting our own police officers. I've spoken to most of the officers that have been assaulted, either by weapon or by punch or kick, and it's something that we have to deal with as police officers, but we accept that, and we're
I assume they're followed by arrests. I assume the assault is followed by an immediate arrest.
Absolutely, and follow-up. As far as the drug offenses, 110 versus 56. That's also due to very assertive enforcement. We're finding more drugs on people. Marijuana arrests. We've arrested 51 for marijuana. Cocaine, 24. Heroin, 23. It goes on. Percocet. So this all totals up to 110 arrests, and that ties in with our assertive engagement with people out there. This is a national trend throughout the country as far as the opioid epidemic. And with that, we're helping people. We've had 102 Narcan saves, and I like to think that's 102 lives that we've actually brought back from the brink of death. So we're engaging, and that's what occurs. I think there was a third part.
The third was sex offenses.
19 versus 14 for the year. So we've arrested 19 people versus 14, if those are the same records, stats you have. One trend this year is...
how does that compare with the number of complaints? 19, how does that compare with the number of complaints? Were there more complaints?
Well, certainly there were more complaints than the 19. The 19 is actually an increase in arrests. Many of those are occurring on train, opposed to the year before where they were occurring in facilities like Penn and Grand Central. We're going to continue the focus on sexual offenses, certainly. And just to raise your, well, I just want to assure you, as far as the graffiti, we certainly don't dismiss it as simply graffiti. We do put resources into each and every one of these crimes.
I look forward to the day where I see those arrests in the column on page 31.
I certainly do too.
as we all do. Any other questions for the chief? If not, we have the approval of the Long Island Railroad Work Plan, page 33. Pat?
Yeah, it's an action item. It is the work plan for the year. It is largely reflective of last year, but with the beefing up of the reporting on positive train control.
Right, which is now going to happen on a presentation basis every time the two committees meet.
Correct.
Right, okay. Any comments on the work plan? If not, I'll make a motion to approve. Second, all in favor? Okay. The first PTC status report for the year is on page 41. This reflects the same type of report was obviously in the Metro North presentation earlier. Pat, I don't know if there's anything you want to specifically delineate.
Yeah, just in the interest of time, I won't go into a lot of depth, but Kathy mentioned this morning that, every railroad in the country was summoned to Washington to meet with the FRA and update them on the status of the project. And part of that was they're letting us know that there will not be any more extensions, that PTC must be completed in accordance with the law that's out there. That said, we were meeting with the new nominated FRA administrator. He has not yet been confirmed. But he does come from the railroad industry. His name is Ron Batori. He was formerly the CEO of Conrail. So he exhibited a very good understanding of the basics of the system, asked a lot of good probing questions, and brought with him 17 members of the FRA to participate in the presentation. Each Metro North and Long Island, we had separate sessions with them. We were not allowed to combine sessions. They were separate sessions. But for both of our sessions, we each brought 3 people to that session. So that was the extent of our involvement. But happy to give you an update if anybody has questions on the program. To me, the key thing is we got some real important milestones coming up on the software side of this business in the next couple of months, and we need to keep our finger on top of them. And I'll leave it at that.
Ira?
Briefly, two concerns. The M3s are being retired. They're not being equipped with PTC,
Correct.
which is fine, even if, and we expect we'll have all the equipment on site and operable by December of this year that will replace. That's 150 cars, right? The M3?
What's the total order, Dave?
For this order here, we actually operate the order size. We have 92 coming in for the base. 150 M3s remain out of the original order. So we do run less of them on a regular basis. But the M9s are coming in fully equipped PTC. In fact, the circuit equipment's being tested right now as part of our commissioning efforts in Colorado, and also we'll start here the first quarter of this year.
But my concern is the difference. We have 150 M3s. We're going to have 92 M9s, right?
M9s, correct.
Right. So if we're not running the M3s in January, are we going to have a shortage? I'm concerned about a shortage of equipment.
We know that we're going to have we're going to be tight on equipment, but the upside of this is that the M9s, especially now this early in the project, we're going to see some very strong reliability that the M3s are we're not putting out there right now. It's one thing that we can roll an M3 out there, but they're blowing fuses, they're having other problems and stuff, and it's about the sustainability of that equipment out on the line when it's assigned, and that will be the biggest upside of having the equipment, even though it might be a little bit smaller in quantity.
Okay, but you're confident we'll be able to maintain the level of service without?
Yes, we're pushing extremely hard on Kawasaki to make sure that we have our full complement, our full order here, on property, and looking at our revenue service. We're working with service planning as well on, equipment needs and assignment. But again, I can't underscore the importance of, it's just one thing to have a piece of equipment to roll out there and say we're going to make the run. No. But if it's failing in midstream, we just offloaded and created a whole other set of issues. And like I said, the reliability of the M9 is going to be there.
That's what I meant. Because of the increased reliability of the M9, the 92 will will do just fine.
Yes, sir.
to our service.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And our staff is looking forward to him as well. I can't underscore that.
And so are the maintenance people, I'm sure.
Across the board.
The other concern is the independent engineer did note that there may be a need for more service outages in order to complete PTC on time. I just, you have to do it now, but as this proceeds, if you could keep us informed of what is necessary, what diversions are necessary over the time, that would be good.
Testing will be a major piece of this program, so.
As long as you keep us up to date about what's going to happen in the future,
Yeah.
what the passenger impact will be of in a way, doing this in an expeditious way. It would be good to, so we have that. Thank you.
Chuck, did you have something on that?
I had a question only in response to something was said, namely that you are, politely put, leaning on Kawasaki to make sure that it delivers in timely and proper fashion on the M9. My question is this. Given the fact that we've awarded or will award today and then on Wednesday a 1,600 unit contract to Kawasaki on the subways, and that there are issues for Kawasaki to address on the work that it's gotten to date, what efforts are being made to ensure that Kawasaki has the capacity to deliver?
That's part of the reason why I use the reference leaning. I want to make sure that we're just as equally as a priority as the subway will be. The good thing for us, and as we've reported, it's not just about the activity that's taking place in Japan. It's the activities that's taking place in Colorado. It's the activities that's taking place in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's the activities that's also taking place in Yonkers. So as we continue to work with them and also our mobilization on site, we have to move and make decisions today that's going to impact us 4 and 5 months ahead of schedule. So I think the other thing why on our part that I'm fairly comfortable is that from a steel and production engineering, whenever they first start with the 211 project, if that comes about, our design, our engineering and such is really kind of getting in a stage of being completed, and now we're just proving things out. Structurally, the car is where it needs to be at. It's just the criticality, it will be systems integration.
Well, Yonkers is a relatively small facility employing maybe 300-400 people. With all the additional space that they have in Yonkers, and as they are trying to redevelop Yonkers, is there any effort being made to urge them to expand their activities in Yonkers to meet the capacity demands?
Luckily for us at this stage, on the superstructure in Lincoln, Nebraska, have a sizable facility that's there. So whenever they assemble and they bring in these large assemblies of the superstructure, it'll be more component installation, and it's just a matter of pit space. And then we are tracking their productivity. Right now, it seems to be in good shape based off their other projects. You look at that plant 2 or 3 years from now, it's going to be pretty tight.
As I love Lincoln, I love Omaha. I even love Colorado. However, I live in New York, and I know there is space to do it in New York. And there are people who want the jobs in New York. So maybe we could put a little emphasis there?
We'll talk to the chairman.
Sure.
About seeing what we can accomplish, especially before we vote on Wednesday.
Okay.
Any other items on PTC? The chairman of the subcommittee, Neil, before he left, if there are any issues in the report that people would like more information on, or if there's different ways in which the report can be compulated for the group, please let me know or let Neil know. The task force met for the first time, of which I'm a member, and Susan and Neil last week, and we want to make sure that what is reported is not only understood but is comprehensive in both railroads and is sufficient for everybody to see what is going on. So if there are any changes to this, let me know afterward, and we will make sure that Pat and Kathy understand that. Procurements.
Good morning.
In the interest of time, I'll move rather quickly. There are 4 items in this month's procurement package in the total amount of $103.5 million. There's 1 item in the non-competitive section in the amount of $18.3 million, 1 item in the competitive section in the amount of $80.4 million, and 2 items in the ratification section in the amount of $4.8 million. I'll bring your attention to 1 item in the non-competitive section, please. That item is an omnibus approval request for Long Island Railroad, Long Island Metro North Railroad, and New York City Transit for items identified as obtainable only from Ansaldo STS USA. The agencies request MTA Board approval in an aggregate amount not to exceed $18.325 million over a 36-month period to purchase the services and/or parts required to support Long Island Railroad, Metro North, and New York City Transit's current inventory of equipment designed and manufactured by Ansaldo. In relation to a previous contract modification issued to Ansaldo by MTA Capital Construction, Ansaldo was found to be responsible, notwithstanding significant adverse information pursuant to the MTA All-Agency Responsibility Guidelines. Such responsibility finding was approved by the MTA CC President in November of 2017. A subsequent review of the contractor's responsibility since that prior modification was conducted by the railroad in connection with this award, and new SAI was found in terms of 1 matter currently being settled. Therefore, the new responsibility findings were approved by the MTA Managing Director in January of 2018. The other 3 items are in the book. I ask your approval for these 4 items.
Any questions on any of these items? Chuck?
Mr. Chairman, the hour is late, and so let me be very brief. I congratulate Long Island Railroad for its coming forward with the plan on monitors, and you will come to that in a moment. But you have a couple of procurements here involving people or entities that have a long record, a historic record of price fixing and other conduct that is deleterious to the interests not only of the riders, but of the system as a whole. And we just keep passing them. We pat them on the back by doing this. We encourage it. May I respectfully suggest that, as I did this morning at Metro North, you have monitors. That is a great step forward. Wherever you have an entity that within the past 5 or 6 years has committed a crime, has been found guilty of committing a crime like bid rigging or price fixing or what have you, where you have that, put a monitor in as a condition of the contract. Watch it, because otherwise you're just encouraging more and more of the same. The SEC made a specific finding as to 1 contractor that was part of the cost of doing business. That's what it seems to be here. It's a simple solution. You've got the monitors, mandate it at their expense.
We will certainly look to that in these contracts. Thank you.
Got it. Ira?
Yeah, on 2 of them. On page 65, the ESI project, it's not relative to this specific project, although I'd like to see like a more comprehensive plan as for why we're selecting the stations we're selecting and what's the plan for Long Island Railroad stations, including accessibility. I note that the stations here in this are all right now accessible. Is that correct? In this contract? If someone get back to me and let me confirm that. I looked on the map, it said they were accessible. So you're putting in accessible bathrooms, that's great. But there's other accessibility issues to the platform, and I just want to make sure that these are, whatever's being done, make sure these stations will be fully accessible. But it would be good to see a comprehensive plan as to why, with the CSI plan, why, the ESI plan, how we're selecting the stations and why they're picked. On page 77, it's a professional services contract. There's a long list of services to be provided. A lot of them we have employees currently.
That's capital construction. Wait on that
sorry, we haven't gotten that yet? Okay.
One at a time before I get confused. All right? Any other questions on any of the 4 Long Island Railroad procurements? If not, I'll make a motion to approve. Susan will second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? Measures approved. That's it for Long Island Railroad? Dennis?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Capital construction?
Good morning. Capital Construction's procurement package this month totals $63.8 million and begins on page 73. There are no non-competitive items this month. There are 29 competitive items totaling $61 million. The first staff summary requests approval to enter into competitively solicited personal service contracts with 26 firms to provide professional staffing and services on an as-needed basis for MTA Capital Construction, the Long Island Railroad, and Metro-North Railroad. This procurement will provide the three agencies with a pool of firms who can provide professional staffing and services to support the planning and management of their projects on an as-needed basis. As each agency identifies specific needs, it will competitively solicit among these selected consultants that have the resources to meet the specific requirements. The aggregate not-to-exceed amount is $56 million, which equates to $36 million for MTACC and $10 million apiece for the two railroads. The second staff summary requests approval to enter into competitively solicited and negotiated contracts with three firms to provide independent monitoring services on MTACC projects for an aggregate not-to-exceed amount of $5 million. These contracts replace three contracts that have expired and will be utilized to ensure contractors are in compliance with laws, rules, and regulations and other contract requirements in the areas of DBE compliance, payments to subcontractors and suppliers, payment of prevailing wages, and other areas of potential fraud. These items are submitted for your consideration and vote.
Now, Ira.
I might raise this in an email. There's a long list of titles here, and a lot of them are people, not titles, people we employ currently to do this kind of work. I just wonder if what would be more efficient this way, or should we hire more engineers or any of these titles, whatever they are, to do this kind of work, since we are involved with ongoing multi-billion-dollar capital work for all the agencies. And the other thing, I noticed New York City Transit's not on this. Do they have a separate contract to do this?
Yes, New York City has a separate contract.
But this is not an issue necessarily at this point for this contract, but this contract's for 5 years. I think within that time we should really take a hard look at what's the best way to do this. And also there's an issue of, I believe, control and supervision and whose work product it is, and all these issues about when we contract out and have an outside engineer do it, are our engineers better? Or would someone be employed by us who's more familiar with our system be the better person to do that type of work in long term? And I wish we'd take a hard look at that to see what is best for the agency.
Commissioner Greenberg, if I may, there's an enormous range of different kinds of work that's here. And so the trade-off always is, if you are trying to cover the waterfront of all the different technical work that you might need in the course of a lot of different kinds of projects, it's hard to predict how much landscape design expertise you're going to need versus a certain kind of engineering expertise versus a certain kind of community affairs management. It varies enormously from project to project. So I think this is an efficient way, and we can certainly talk about hiring in-house or not. That tends to commit you to paying the full package of wage and benefits and so on, without knowing exactly if you're going to be able to use that person's expertise fully efficiently over a long-term manner. Now, there are some categories where we definitely need our own people, and we know that we'll be using them all the time. But here, this allows us to get at one of the principal inefficiencies of our procurement process, which is even for something little. If you're starting from scratch, you got a 6-month procurement. That's what staff tells me when I say we need some expertise on this issue. They say it's 6 months. So here you've got the opportunity to do competitive procurements. You got to, in fact, you pick from among these companies those who are expert or have the expertise, and you do a mini bid that's competitive, but you don't have to spend 6 months at it, and that is a great benefit.
No, I agree with that for when we need special expertise or expertise we don't have an ongoing use for. It's just the list of civil engineer, for instance, or some of the, I guess you have to be pretty broad, but it would be good to know, are we going outside for the same type of engineering services where maybe it would have been better? And even if we, I mean, we are a huge agency. We could have central MTA people possibly do some civil engineering work, and they'd be doing it for different agencies. So I'm, you know, considering how large the MTA is and how much work we do, I don't know. It's 56 million, I think, over 5 years. So I don't know what that, you know, if you use factors how many people that is or how much work that is as a portion of the total work done, but interesting to see some of those numbers. But I don't disagree with actually having to do this because of what you say. For instance, maybe some environmental concerns or some specific issue that we don't need that's specific to a site or even some situational things. But I think we can have an ongoing discussion about it.
And I would also assume that this is an all-encompassing list. We don't use all of it over any, we may use very few of these categories over a period of time, but it allows us to have the opportunity, if necessary, to do it in this much more efficient manner. That's how I was looking at the list. Not that we always do use every category, but it gives us options on what to do.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's how I looked at it. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Norman?
Yeah, I'd like to volunteer for the blasting expert assignment. You probably got a long list of commuters that would like to handle that for you.
Whatever we're blasting at the content. Any other questions? If not, I'll make a motion to approve. Second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
There is one ratification item.
Yep, David, go ahead.
I'm sorry, there's one ratification item totaling $2.8 million. The item requests the ratification of a modification to the East Side Access Systems Facilities Package Number 1 to implement repairs and upgrades to prevent water infiltration into 4 existing facilities that were constructed as part of the original construction of the 63rd Street Tunnel. The facility is currently in operation by New York City Transit for subway service. However, the areas where the infiltration is occurring are currently vacant and are intended for use by the East Side Access Systems equipment. This item is submitted for your consideration and vote.
Any questions on this item? I'll make a motion to approve. There a second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried.
That concludes our procurement package.
Procurements. There are operations reports in the back of the book for November and December. Are there any questions on any of these items? Ira, go ahead.
I'm sorry, just one short question. It's regarding the elevator and escalator availability. Port Jefferson branch seems to be I mean, it seems to have had a problem. I just would, if someone doesn't know now, it's fine. I just want to hear back what the issue was. It's the only one below 99% for elevator availability. So someone could just get back to me on that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get back to Ira on that. Good. If nothing else, motion to adjourn. Second, all in favor. Thank you all very much.